I
You're
think
now
there's
live.
a meeting to go to at 5, so um we will take a hard stop at 5. But we're gonna go through today. This is F53, and Abby, I think, is here. And we had told Abby, we went through, told her what we did and didn't want to do with the whole corporate tax thing. Asked her to draft that up and bring it back, and see if we can do that. So Abby, can you share screen and tell us what we wanted?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Abby Shepherd, Office of Legislative Counsel, for the record. Would you like me to share? There are several, actually many documents under my name for this afternoon. I think that the side-by-side might be the easiest to follow, but I could show you the language.
No, I think
what's your preference?
Not hearing anything side by side, and then we can look at fine tuning.
Give me just a moment, I'll share my screen. Is that large enough for everyone to see?
Yes, let me get rid of the committee and then I can read it. Okay, that's good.
Sorry.
Whoops. There you go.
Sorry. So as a quick overview, what the committee had asked for last week was to have a strike all amendment that eliminated the vast majority of what was passed out of the House in the S53 proposal of amendment. So that included the change to the single sales factor apportionment. That is not in this draft. It removed the corporate minimum tax changes, the cloud tax, the military retirement income tax exemption, and the DFR mutual fund fee. Those are all eliminated from this version. Obviously, the feminine hygiene product sales tax exemption language is eliminated because that no longer applies. It was drafted as though that did not exist. That exemption does now exist. The language does include that change to the sort of more respectful language using menstrual products.
Okay.
So to walk you through on this side by side, I've tried to include both. So it's the typical side by side where the as passed the Senate version, then you have the House proposed amendment, and then the
that
Senate.
Doesn't really work on this one, does it?
It's a little confusing. So I've tried, and I hope it's not too much information. I'd be happy to amend how this is presented. But I've tried to note, because the section numbers no longer line up, where you're seeing the House proposal of amendment, I've added in italics in the Senate strike all amendment what happened to the House proposal of amendment, whether it was retained or just moved up to a different section.
Okay.
So going through section by section, the first two sections were the feminine hygiene products exemption and statutory purpose. Those have been removed. Now that is the first two sections are corporate income tax related. So the first is the 80-20 rule definitions in the corporate income tax definitions. The language is the same as what was in the House proposed amendment in a different section, section 3. Next is in section 2, the repeal of the throwback rule is in this language. If I misunderstood the committee's discussion, please correct me. There was some back and forth. I understood the sort of final-ish landing place was that single sales factor would be removed, but the repeal of the throwback would be included in this bill.
That was my understanding.
Okay.
But I think it was late on Friday, so we may not have understood it.
I think that there was some, there was a question about whether it had to be tied to the single sales factor apportionment, or whether or not it was more related to the switch to Finnegan. And this bill does switch Vermont's method of determining state jurisdiction. It retains Finnegan, so it would flow with the whole package to keep throwback. Okay. I think that's the reason there was some back and forth there. So section 3 makes the change from Joyce to Finnegan. And it also has some provisions relating to the 80-20 rule. It makes it clear how US incorporated corporations that are abroad, how their income will be included in the apportionment factors. And here I have further language in italics saying see section 1. So that's more just trying to orient the reader. I hope it's not too much information. In section 4 of the Senate proposed amendment, or your committee's proposed amendment, the corporate minimum tax change is no longer in there. It instead transitions from Joyce to Finnegan. It explains how the first year will function. So it lays out the Finnegan method. And please, if you want me to go, I'm just trying to give you a quick overview, but I can get into more detail if you'd like. Okay. The single sales factor that previously was in section 5 has been repealed. Now section 5 repeats language that was in the House amendment, but it changes the dates. It requires rulemaking by the department on these new changes to unitary combined reporting requirements. It also requires a report by the Department of Taxes on or before January 15th of 2024. So the only change there is the date. And then sections 6 and 7 change the feminine hygiene products language to menstrual products.
Okay.
And then the final section in the strike all is the effective dates. In the effective dates, it does push out the changes to the corporate income tax by 1 year. So that is a slight change from the House version, but it follows the same policy reasoning of giving the department time to implement the changes and also giving taxpayers a heads up that changes are coming.
And we are.
And then, oh, I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
I just said we are a year later.
Correct. So it follows the same logic. And then the remaining sections are all deleted, which I've shown here, sections 9 going on until section 16. This language does also change the title because the House proposal of amendment also changed the title. It would be an act relating to changes to Vermont's corporate income tax and sales and use tax. The sales and use tax is referring to the menstrual products exemption.
Okay. Okay. Committee, is that what you wanted to do? Senator Brock? No, you muted, Senator.
This is a question regarding repealing or not dealing with the single sales factor, which is something that I gather that is something I guess the rest of the states in New England have done, and at least from what I've heard, may actually benefit Vermont employers. Can we perhaps just, I want to try to understand why we would decide not to do single sales factor. Where did that come from?
I think Senator Pearson, you were the leading voice on that. I think it had to do with the money. This was the section that cost the state money. Was that primarily?
Well, that's where I was coming from. We went round and round. It costs a bunch of our companies money. It saves some money. It allegedly brings in money from other big companies that aren't so present. And last year, the estimate was 20 million hit to the general fund, and this year only 11 million. And that's where I would confess to finding the whole thing confusing and simplifying to, geez, why would we give big corporations a $11 million tax break?
My understanding, and I may be wrong on this though, is that our manufacturer, particularly manufacturers in Vermont, would that export goods, this would have high value for them. That some of our companies wind up paying more taxes by virtue of our not having single sales factor than otherwise. And so, at least from what I've been told, is that this not having this, in fact, disadvantages a number of our companies who wind up paying taxes here and also paying taxes elsewhere, which If we had single sale factor, that would not be the case. Am I misunderstanding how this works?
Well, that is certainly the testimony, Senator. We could play the tape, but when I suggested, I didn't think I would do very well. And then you added your voice to say that it was somewhat cloudy. And so I can tell you've had a change of heart, but
well, I actually just read through some of the materials in a little bit more detail that I had not read at the time that we talked about it. Just trying to understand the impact, which is why I'm re-raising that issue to say, is this, and particularly when I see the tide of other states, it seems to be prevailing, and I'm always concerned when we wind up being an outlier. If there's a reason for it, that would be one thing, but my sense is that having single sales factor actually would benefit companies that are domiciled here in Vermont.
There are times when some would say it's good for us to be slow to change. Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's a feeling of inevitability on this, and I would just argue this is not the time with so much volatility in the business sector, in employment, in revenues. I'm prepared to be outvoted, but I that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, Senator Sirotkin.
I guess I too thought we had decided in this direction, and part of the reason I think is we're starting to hear the mantra that we always hear, that all the money's been spent and there's not enough money, and even though we're flowing in the money, we got to worry about the following year. And I don't think the case has been made to justify all the things I'm dealing with down the hall, trying to justify money for business and money for workers. I'm just not there yet myself.
Okay. No, Senator Bray doesn't have his hand up. That's my. All right. Senator Hardy.
Well, my recollection when we were talking about this before was that I was saying I would support moving this to the single sales factor, but only if we did also the increase in the minimum tax. And my recollection, Senator Brock, was that you were not happy with the increase in the minimum tax, because that would offset at least some of the decrease in revenues. So unless we're going to do both, I couldn't do just, wouldn't be willing to do just one of them. So I think what Senator Pearson offered was an option to say, well, then we'll do neither of them. And I was fine with that too. So it's either all or neither, or both or neither.
I had raised the issue about the minimum tax as to, well, where do those numbers come from, and are they meaningful, and would they create a disadvantage to us? And the more I've looked at it, I don't like that provision, but I like single sales factor a lot more. And if I were presented with a choice of all or nothing, I would take single sales factor, quite frankly. And moving in that direction, if I had to stomach the high minimum tax, because that high minimum tax would largely be applied, I think, to folks elsewhere. But notwithstanding that, I don't know that that's as big a factor by any means in my thought process.
We heard most Vermont businesses fall into that lower tier, which would actually see a decrease.
Correct.
Our smaller Vermont businesses would see a decrease. The bigger businesses, and we don't have that many big businesses located in Vermont, would pay a higher minimum tax. So committee, I'm trying to get this section of the bill, which is the one that needs to go because they're figuring in revenue or lack thereof. But yeah, I think, Graham, what was the last 1 point some million that it was a package, the minimum tax offset the single sales factor, more or less, given that this is all a very fluid Champlain and corporate taxes vary widely year to year. But that was really the purpose. And so take on its own, the single sales factor costs, but taken in concert with the increase in the minimum tax at the higher end, and it's high because those are sales into Vermont. That was the balance. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, somewhat. So for the record, Graham Campbell from the Joint Fiscal Office, the numbers have kind of moved on this since it came over to your committee, but more or less the way I think the House constructed it was to offset the loss in revenue and single sales factor. It was a combination of the corporate minimum tax plus the DFR fees, which are at this point not in the draft that Abby showed you. The DFR
Well, that's
fees
just because we were doing this section. We can look at the DFR fees if we need to, but if I remember correctly, they were also raised, and the cloud tax was put in to raise revenue. And if we're this close, we may not need to raise revenue.
Right. So since the estimates have been revised, essentially the way the math works on this is as Abby has drafted, and there is a document posted on the committee's webpage, the three corporate tax pieces generate about $3 million in fiscal year 23 and about 8.7 million in fiscal year 24. And so if the committee put back in the single sales factor in order to make this bill or at least the corporate package, not a revenue loss, you would need to put in the corporate minimum tax to offset the revenue loss.
Okay. Senators not heard from. Senator Bray, what's your thoughts on this?
You're muted.
All right, thank you. I just came back into the meeting from meeting with Ledge Council, so I'm feeling not well equipped to answer the question
Okay.
anymore.
And Senator McDonald.
I'm leaning with Pearson and Saretta.
Okay, so everybody is saying we take out, or at least three, we take out both sections and go to conference. Or I would, who am I missing? I would prefer to do the package, but I will do what the committee wants. So Senator Bray, you're getting to be a very important vote here. And the argument is we're either, right now, what we have drafted is we have taken out the single sales factor,
Right.
which does arguably, if it's in, benefit Vermont businesses because it doesn't count their payroll or their physical property as part of their income in the state, as part of, I'm not sure if it's numerators or denominators, but, and we only, so right now we count that. If we only count sales, I think we all got a email. I know I did, and somebody else did, from Champlain Cable that said very little of their sales are in Vermont, but their plant is. And so this would help them. And I'm sure there are other dairy product related companies that might like to be close to the source. But that cost us money. And to offset that money,
Right.
the House raised, well, it did more tiers it lowered the bottom tier in which the majority of Vermont corporations would fall that pay a minimum tax. And then it significantly raised the top tiers. And they're not completely equal, but they're a lot more equal than they were when we first started calculating. So they left them in, we took them out. I think everything else remains the same. Is that right, Abby? We haven't taken anything else out. We've kept Finnegan to Joyce to Finnegan.
Mr. Finnegan, the repeal of the 80-20 rule and the repeal of the throwback. That's still in the bill.
This is what we're going to have to decide.
Right. So can I get a clarification on if we remove both sections, as in what's the net revenue impact of removing both? Sorry to ask that again. I know we've talked about it. Just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding.
So the net revenue impact of removing single sales and the corporate minimum tax, but keeping the other three provisions, is a revenue up for the general fund of $3.17 million in fiscal 23 and $8.7 million in fiscal year 24.
So,
Okay.
if you're asking for a position, then that's the direction I would go.
Okay. So that.
Let me just ask a question, Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes. Senator
And that
Brown.
is, Graham, that in the event that you put both of those sections in, we know what the loss is in the event that you just did the single sales, the single sales factor. But if you put both of those factors back in, what's the effect?
So with both provisions back in, plus the three that are currently in the draft that Abby has shown you, the impact would be a $590,000 revenue increase to the general fund in 23 and a $1.7 million revenue increase in 24. So essentially, it's a net revenue neutral bill.
Yeah, it's Senator Hardy.
Seems to me that if we're gonna go to conference on this anyway, we might as well just go to conference, and then if we end up needing the money, then we have an avenue for having the money, and if we don't end up needing the money, we have an avenue for not needing the money, not having the money. So
Okay.
then, so just if we go with just those three provisions and then a revenue up, then we have both options on the table between the House and the Senate, and that seems like a good place to be.
Okay, so we've agreed on that. I'm sure we're not going to get the cloud tax in on this one, but we do have some of the, because the military retirement is in here, but we also have civil service. Well, actually, we have another vehicle because the House has sent us over an increase, I think, in the child tax credit. Somewhere they have sent us an increase to the Social Security
That's
deduction.
right, Madam Chair. Yes.
So that might be, if we can't resolve the pension thing now, that could be a vehicle. But I'd like to try and see if we can't find some resolution. I'm going to propose that we have a bill that exempts anyone over the age of 65 from paying taxes, because I don't have a pension and I don't know how I'm going to live here. But I'm managing. So I think I'd like to see if we can't get that resolved, and put this bill back out as at least that much of a package. And Abby, we've got a couple other bills we've been asked to look at, and Abby has brought us things. Next is 437. This is an old bill. We worked on it. I thought we'd voted it out, but apparently we didn't. And it's been sitting on the wall, and since we're not looking at the wall, it kind of got lost. And I got asked about it, and they said they would like it. So Abby, you want to walk us through what's in here, and we can see if we'll make
Are you-
them happy.
Are you suggesting we would add it to 53, Madam Chair?
No, this is an H bill. And
Yeah,
I'm not sure if it's one of those H bills that we sent I think it's an H bill they sent us last year. I thought we had amended it and sent it back, but it may have been one of those bills that was hanging on the calendar. I
I
don't
do-
know what happened to it.
yeah, I remember it and regret that we didn't do it because it was a property transfer,
There's
a tier at the higher end, which
Yep.
would have been lucrative. I only asked my question because do you want to move S53? Are we ready to do that, or are you waiting for?
No, we haven't done the retirement section.
Got it.
So
Thanks.
if we can agree, and I can tell them, people in the House, that this is what, we haven't voted yet, but this is what we've agreed on, then we can see if we can find some resolution to the whole retirement thing and put it here and not have to worry about if it's germane, if we tack it down to a Social Security bill and a child tax credit bill, which gets a little iffy if someone wants to challenge it. So I'm just, voting takes 5 minutes once we're agreed. So I'm just trying to reach that. Okay. So this is H437. And if Abby walks us through it, I remember all the discussion. There's the credit or tax credit or grant for updating mobile home. What do we call them now? Trailer. Mobile homes. And there's the manufacturing clarification, I guess. Basically that it's tax exempt if it is directly involved in manufacturing. And what the tax department has told us is the only time they pick this up is when they go in for an audit. And it's things like if you go over to the Granite Museum and they got chisels and files and all kinds, and they have a suction machine that keeps the white dust and prevents white lung going all the time. And is that or is that not part of the integral manufacturing product? Or, but it was that kind of axillary but vital things, and we can check it, but that was in there. I believe this was one of those bills that was balanced. There was something for everybody to love and everybody to hate in it. And Abby, just walk us through it.
Okay, would you like me to share my screen with the section by section? Would that be the most helpful?
Yeah, that would probably be the most helpful.
So this is H437, the revenue bill that was passed by the House. The section by section that Faith has posted under my name for today is of the passed House version. Thought it would make more sense to start there. And then if you'd like, I can refresh your memory about some of your discussions and what there was language that the committee did look at last May that provided amendments, but I figured that was too far in the past to start with. Didn't want to confuse too many of the issues. So the first two sections relate to the property transfer tax. The House passed a surcharge of 0.5% on the value of transfers of property by deeded title when the value of the transfer is over $1 million. So this applied to all deeded real property. One potential change that I think was in the amendment from your committee was to clarify that the treatment of controlling interest, to make it clear that it was just, or that it did apply to both controlling interest. Oh, sorry, I switched screens. Both controlling interests and actual real property. Also in that change, the committee had considered increasing the amount, so it was over 1.5 million. The language that was passed out of the House also requires the Commissioner of Taxes to estimate the amount of revenue raised by the surcharge and deposit all of that revenue into the general fund. And the second section is just making a clarifying change, a conforming change in the general fund section to be clear that surcharge revenue would go there, because currently the property transfer tax is split. There's a statutory split, and then there's a notwithstanding that happens in the appropriations process that sort of sends it to different entities. So
Isn't
that's actually
part of
what
that-
section, oh, I'm sorry, yes?
No, isn't part of that dedicated to paying off the $30 million housing bond?
That is part of the, and I don't actually have this
We
statutory
had
or
to have a
the,
dedicated revenue source, and my memory says that's it. The first X thousand comes off the top of property transfer.
yes, there's a whole complicated split
Yeah.
that happens in reality, and then there's also the statutory allocation. So in section 3, it notwithstands the statutory allocation of revenues to the Housing and Conservation Trust Fund and to the Municipal and Regional Planning Fund. And again, it requires the Commissioner of Taxes to put all of the surcharge revenues into the general fund. So it would sort of insulate as much as possible this surcharge revenue to make sure that it would go into the general fund. So those are the property transfer tax sections. As you did just mention, Madam Chair, there are 2 other sections in this bill. One is the sales and use tax exemption for manufacturing equipment. So it expands the exemption from a direct and exclusive use standard to exempting equipment that is part of an integrated production process. That was a request by the Department of Taxes that was passed out of the House. And lastly, the affordable housing tax credit was expanded under the bill, and it was for manufactured homes. It increased the annual amount of the first year affordable housing tax credits by $250,000 each year. And then it dedicated that amount to credits used to purchase and restore manufactured homes. And the bill was effective on July 1st, 2021.
Okay, so we'd have to change that date if nothing else.
That's correct.
Senator Sirotkin.
So, Madam Chair, the so-called mansion tax and the increase in the manufactured home credit are also in a bill in my committee that has passed the House and the Senate. It was taken back into our committee. Only those 2 things are only in the House passed version. The bill is S101, and we are likely to pass out of our committee a lot more around manufactured homes, but includes the provision on the manufactured home credit that's in this bill. So I don't know how you want to proceed, but the only thing that stands out that's not probably going to be dealt with also in other places is the manufacturing adjustment that the tax department wants.
Senator Hardy.
Senator Sorokin, just a clarifying question. Does S101 include the property transfer tax surcharge, the mansion tax in it?
I'll give you a brief version. S101, as it came from the Senate, was a housing land use bill that had a lot of things in it. And it came back to us with just the mansion tax and the increase in the mobile home credit. And so I don't know if you recall, I stood up on the floor of the Senate right on and said, there's such a chasm here between these 2 bills. We're not prepared to make any suggestions just yet. And we took it off the calendar. It's in our committee. But as we're dealing with housing, that bill may very well come into play. But
Okay.
I couldn't tell you right now what we're going to do with it.
Yeah,
Okay.
see, and it probably add things on it. This is an H bill. We can concur, I believe, or we can amend, and we made a couple of amendments or discussed them. One was to raise that to 1.5 million. And oh, this also covered commercial properties?
So there were several, so I'm actually just trying to pull up the language, which I could share with you, because there were several different versions that you considered. And the most recent one was on May 17th. Sorry, my computer's.
That has to have been the last day of the session. Okay,
You had at one point considered making it only on residential property. So I have several different versions that you looked at. Also putting it on any property transferred, so it would include controlling interest, because when some second homes are owned by LLCs, so that would apply to those properties, so that you wouldn't be sort of carving out a whole portion of more valuable properties from the surcharge. You had also contemplated adding a sunset to the increase to the surcharge. And I'm just scrolling through. I think you had also increased the amount that would be allocated. Just looking at this. Oh no, I'm sorry. That was the sunset language. So it was reverting back to the old allocation.
okay.
I should mention one other thing, Madam Chair, and that
Yeah.
is the governor's proposal this year has a fourfold increase in it for the manufactured home credit from $250,000 to $1 million increase. So the landscape has changed. And quite frankly, I remember going around and around on this in this committee, and maybe it was
Yeah.
just that we ran out of time, but I think there was real disagreement as well.
Senator Pearson.
My question's for Senator Sorokin. Part of the disagreement, if I recall, was that you were not necessarily in favor of changing the transfer tax, and that's fine. Usually we almost always agree. But now you're saying it's part of another bill. And I guess my question is, as you know, I share an interest in you being successful in your endeavors around housing. Do you think it's important to keep it in that bill, or is there some value in us moving this bill? After all, it's an H bill that at least some of the sections are coming to us. We would be agreeing, seems like a simple path. And so I'd like you to, I wonder, Senator Sorokin, if you can help us understand some of those dynamics.
I'll try. In addition, I guess in deference to comedy among chairs, I guess this is an H bill, and I don't think it needs to move before crossover. And it remains to be seen whether in what version S101 will surface from my committee, but I have a feeling it will surface in some form with other housing pieces put on it, and probably the same pieces that we sent over to them. I can't begin to explain the House process over there. It went to so many committees and it came out like hamburger. I mean, it couldn't recognize it from its former self. It dealt with municipal wastewater, downtown tax credits, bylaw modernization, a really good bill, and it came out with the mansion tax. So, which I
A
continue.
lot of that last year.
What?
So there was a lot of that last year where bills went over and came back really strange. I mean, we can wait. We could get these sections, and they'll probably go through because the administration likes the manufacturing tax, and have those done, and then you wouldn't have to worry about them. Or we could
The manufacturing tax sounds like a good idea to me. It has no effect on the other bill. The other things I think may, and as I said, the governor even would propose more for mobile
I'm
home.
sure that's one-time money, yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to suggest. But in response to Senator Pearson, I am still opposed to the mansion tax, and I can almost guarantee you will cause this bill to be vetoed.
Well,
Not if it's tied to the
so that-
manufacturing, that's.
I mean, isn't that the point of keeping it in here and protecting the work you're doing? That's my point, I guess. But I
I just-
easily could be missing something.
No, I don't. I'm not sure if I heard you correctly. I think keeping it here gives us a chance for more options to figure out where we are. I mean, there could be, if you vote it out and something different comes out of my committee, there could be a ruling request saying we've already voted on that and we need a rule suspension to change it, using like the mobile home tax
Okay.
credit as an example.
I feel like you're saying yes and no. And
Well,
so,
I would rather there be no movement on the parts that are in S101 in my committee.
Huh.
And it's S101, it's a Senate bill, but it has already passed the Senate and it's passed the House. It's ready for a report for our committee to say what we want to recommend the Senate do with those changes the House made.
Okay, but it is going to be more complicated than this bill.
Yes.
All right, why don't you take a look at it, think about it, and let us know when we get back if we need to just vote this one out.
Okay.
All right?
Yep.
And you might also check with the Propes and see what they're planning or thinking about doing with the governor's increase, because that would be the one big thing if he's increasing that. But that doesn't mean that the Appropriations Committee is going to follow suit. They may be taking that money and using it somewhere else. So check and see what the playing field looks like at this point. And then we can decide if we want to send out this simple little but somewhat balanced bill, or wait for what I am sure, Senator, will be a more complex bill. I thought I was the only one that liked to decorate,
To get what?
that liked to decorate Christmas trees.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we're going to go on to our last one. And Abby, I don't know, have you had time? You have drafted this amendment, right? All right, you remember the other
Yeah.
day, we have been waddling around in the quagmire of timeshare valuations. And we had Jill Remick come in and talk to us about that underlying structure that makes it harder for towns to appeal on this. And we sent Jill and Abby off and asked them to get that into drafting language. And then when we get back, we suggested that we hear from the actual head of the VALA, Listers Association. Tom Vickery was the head for so many years, I just assumed he was, which just proves that saying about assume is correct. And we will hear from the actual VALA, because the indication was that they might have a different position and will probably have a broader understanding of what's going on in the state as a whole. So we aren't going to vote this one out. We are going to hear from VALA and then see what we can do. I'd like to make the town of Cambridge, make their life a little easier. And And I'm sure 5.2 million is going to show up somewhere in the ed fund. As a, it's a loss. So this one will get out the week we get back. So Abby, just walk us through what we've got here.
So, Madam Chair, what I had drafted was fairly restricted. The conversation went very large and then came back to a very specific point. And that is all that you see in the draft amendment
Okay.
under my name for S214. So we'll share my screen and walk you through that.
All right.
And then, oops, no, sorry. There we go. Okay, so this is very restricted to the current cap of $100,000 when a town's grand list has been reduced following a final appeal or a court order. This amendment strikes the sentences that impose the cap and require the director of PBR to prorate any reductions amongst towns, so that it was only $100,000 spread out across the whole state. That's removed, so it would allow for essentially ed fund refunds to towns when they've had a reduced grand list to be made dollar for dollar. The effective date is January 1st, 2023, and it will apply to municipalities who are asking for a refund for the prior calendar year's court order or final appeal decision. So that I have not considered how that would impact Cambridge. I don't know if that was your intent, was to help Cambridge in particular.
No,
It's
I'd
not
like
clear that
to,
it would be
but
available
it's
to them.
hard. Yeah, it's hard to make laws retroactive. They got caught in this one, but they have settled and not appealed. So I don't know that we can help them.
Let me just
Only
check. I
for 1
believe
year.
settlements are covered as well, but it's more about the timing just because of current statute requiring the town to request the refund in the, if the court order or appeal decision is made in say 2022, the town has to request the refund by January 15th of 2023. So they might just have missed the window in that case. I don't know what their timing is.
Okay. I don't either, but we could forward this.
This has been shared with Jill Remick of PBR.
Well, I was going to say we could forward it to
Or to
the
Cambridge.
town clerk in Cambridge or to Tom Vickery, who I think is their lister, and Davala, and see what they think. Senator Hardy, I saw your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And Abby and I exchanged a couple emails, and Abby, I didn't get a chance to get back to you, but so my recollection or understanding of our conversation the other day, and sometimes I'm not exactly sure I follow all of our conversations, so was that we were trying to have a broader look at this and put in some of the provisions that were recommended to help towns with these complex valuations to begin with.
That's right.
So that's what I thought, where I thought we were going with this.
Yeah, it is. You're right.
And oh, good. Yay. I did remember right. That makes me
You
happy.
did. I'm it's getting late. I'm getting too focused.
Exactly. Well, yeah, well, it's always late. So that's what I was hoping to see in this draft was a broader look at, and it would help towns that have weird valuation things that they have to do, whether they're timeshares or dams or digesters.
Yeah, and it was the provision that said that the state would assist or provide assistance to towns in valuing unique projects.
Exactly.
And Jill said she thought that was a good idea. So maybe we could get back to Jill and say, Jill, because we did get the reply from the tax department. We know the dams have always been an issue. For Barry, if you just have one big new building, or one manufacturing plant. Remember, our listers are not trained appraisers in most cases, I would say.
Yeah, and this would help them to better value these properties. And then if they get stuck in a suit, they have the help of the state. And so they'd be less likely to back down on a dispute with a valuation because they've had the assistance of the state.
Yeah.
So I think overall it might help a bunch of towns rather than just focusing on helping.
Oh, yeah. Well, this gives them more money. I mean, we've got two different issues.
Exactly.
We've got how does Cambridge know how to value timeshares or dams that are owned half by New Hampshire or digesters? And when we first started putting out solar panels on roofs and backyard windmills, we had the same issues. The valuations were all over the place because the listers didn't know what they did to property value.
Right.
So this, I think, would ask for more state guidance and is separate. It's connected, but it's separate from this prorating. This says when you appeal and you lose it, the money's going to come back to you. The town isn't going to have to raise the money for the taxpayer.
Right.
Okay, Senator McDonald.
Madam Chair, we've been talking about the people that value the things that listers don't know how to value for 30 years.
Yeah.
You yourself know better than the rest of us about how you value dams because you served on a commission to evaluate the dams the state was thinking of buying.
No, I actually was on buying the dams.
You were, yeah, that's what you did, and you probably learned more about it than the rest of us.
Well, enough.
In this case, we have a problem with timeshares. We're not the only state to have this problem. And do we not have, the associations that keep track of what other states do when they have similar problems? And why have we yet to take a look at what another state has done on how to deal with timeshares? Or we rejected that.
We got all that information. I think either Abby or Jill sent it to us, and it's kind of all over the board. And I think what we're seeing is we didn't have a problem until the market value of timeshares started to drop. And that's what's changing.
That's why we're discussing it now instead of before the time.
Right.
But have any of our staff taken a look and said, here are 3 of them ideas that might work to have a way to appraise these things from now on? And can we take a look at them, or are we going to spend our time redesigning the fund that pays for things after they've gone awry? So
I think, given the quagmire, it may well be beyond our pay grade to figure out how to appraise these.
I was looking to plagiarize, Madam Chair, not figure it out.
Well, take a look at, because you've got them in your emails, a whole bunch of other states. But I read them and I didn't see a clear lighted path. I just saw more quagmire.
Okay. You've given me a task.
There isn't a bright path here. And that was before the changes. I think if there were a bright path, Vala would have said, this is how we want them appraised. So Senator Brock.
All I would add is in terms of solving to some extent a problem that we have, the draft that Abby has done that simply eliminates that $100,000 artificial limit is very, very important to solving the problem for the municipalities that have one this year. And that's why this is so important. All of these things that we can do in order to evaluate how we do valuations are good and are future oriented, but they don't necessarily solve the problems that are on our doorstep. And I, for one, have a damn problem in the town of Sheldon.
You do. Okay.
And this is good
So,
as a result. So
Yeah.
I support it.
So I think we can do this, the thing Abby has drafted. There is the report back that we asked for that Faith has sent out to us from the tax department on, and we can work with Jill and just say, this is, because it's Jill's people that are going to do it. This is how, the state will assist towns in dealing with unique, such as, the valuation of unique properties. And that gets the town out, because Cambridge hired an appraiser. And that appraiser, so I remember, couldn't figure out how to appraise these things. So they paid to hire a professional appraiser, not just their town of Lister. So this would take the burden off the towns, would give them the help in these unique properties, and they could stick to residential and storefronts that, you've got enough recent sales data to do a market analysis. And then we could ask property valuation to come back with a proposal on, if any, for how you would value timeshares, and any recommendations, if any, for changing the statutes. Because I don't believe how you appraise them is in statute. That's kind of open to the listers, right? They have at least 3 ways. I know you can do market value and income, and I'm pretty sure there's a third way, and then some more hybrid ways. So Senator Hardy.
Yeah, that was my recollection from what we heard from Jill, was that she said there already are the tools to be able to do this, and that doesn't really require a statutory change. It just requires, a lister to come up with a value and then be able to defend it. And that's where they're having the hard time, is being able to defend them. And so that seems like the problem we want to try to solve, because they have the tools to value the properties. They just are going to get
And having done my share of market analysis, which are not appraisals, but it is as much art, I can remember doing tax appeals my first year in the city council, when Montpelier found the bugs in this new state cap-tap system. And I kept saying, well, I have seen 100 different bathrooms, and I still don't know. As far as I can figure out, a low-grade bathroom is an outhouse, an upgrade bathroom is a spa, and everything else in between is average, even though there was a huge range in average. And how it really is more experience, and this is what this market will pay for. And that varies over time, over geography. Swimming pools don't add a lot of value to property in Vermont in general. I've sold at least one where the woman said, I'm just going to fill it in with dirt. But in the South, they add a lot of value. So it's art. It's as much art as science. And that makes it difficult. Appraisers have formulas, but listers aren't quite as rigid as that. So Senator Brock.
I think one of the other things, though, that if we come back to this, aside from what we have in this amendment, which is fine, which I think is good.
Good.
is as we think about valuation of the future, I think we also have to think about whether or not we have disincentives for towns to contest appeals, which I do believe we do. This has been raised in this issue. It's been raised in my issue as well, that the cost for challenging this, the cost for defending against these things is quite high. And whether or not, particularly for our smaller towns that have very, very limited budgets, is there any potential protection that the state can add if they're going to add to be able to provide them with assistance in doing the appraisal? If the appraisal is challenged and the legal fees will drive the town bankrupt, we need to be able to help along those lines as well.
We did this. The discussion came up. And I think I'm thinking health and welfare because the incident was up in Essex or it was in Chittenden County, but there was a chain store that national, I believe, chain store that challenged its local appraisal. And you got into, when it came to resources, Sampson and Delilah, no, that got, yeah. And David and Goliath. And the town just didn't have the resources that this nationally corporate store did. And because there's one of these stores in almost every town in Vermont, the concern was that, like this, with the timeshares where you've got some group going around and telling the town, you know, you should appeal it and because you don't have any value anymore. And there was a concern that if this chain could do this in one town, it would just do it in all the other towns. And I don't know if that, I remember working on it. Abby, do you remember anything? I'll have to check with Senator Lyons, and maybe it was just her issue and she never got it into a bill, but I remember there being concern and that just, if you've got the resources, you can drag things out all the way to the Supreme Court. And it takes a long time and a lot of money to do that. And so, but Abby, have we given you enough to work with or too much?
May I ask if you, that was actually, I was hoping to ask you some clarifying questions because in
Yes.
the report back from PVR, there are a couple of options. And I did just want to take one step back and confirm that the current refund statute does apply to settlements. It's not just appeals. It includes settlements of an
Okay.
appeal or
Good, so maybe,
pending decision. Also, it does not cover legal fees. So it is just the portion of the ed tax liability from the town that the town owes back to the taxpayer. It does not apply to the defense of any appeals.
okay.
And what the PVR report, and probably Jill would be the best person, but just summarizing what is in that report, there are a couple of options: providing professional appraiser assistance to towns, or creating a state appraisal program, or a state appraisal and litigation assistance program. So you have that both the appraisal side and also the defense side. That was also brought up by the Tax Structure Commission. So for me to draft something, I think I would, I don't know if you want me to work with Jill, if you want.
Well,
you
Jill, or
have
this
a
is
strong
also
feeling about that.
Senator Hardy's idea, and my instinct would be go for the blue plate special here and set up a state defense system, which we will then probably have to whittle down just because of the expense. But I think that would be something, and then we'll put that out. You know, to affected parties. And this is one, because it involves taxes. If we can't get it done in a week, we might be able to put it on miscellaneous tax. Or we can just send this one out as is. And we'll just take a look at it, but, and then, so it is, so what will we have to do for the dates to help Cambridge?
I don't know enough about the Cambridge situation. I'd have to go back through the testimony. I don't know when the settlement was made. They
I
might have
don't
missed the
either.
window unless you wanted to have a retroactive application of removing the cap.
I wouldn't mind making it retroactive for a year. Just,
So towns would
yeah,
apply
'cause it-
by next
yeah.
January since the January 15th deadline has applied. So when the change is
Right.
made, it can go back as far as 2021.
yeah, let's
For
find out,
appeals?
yeah, let's check with probably Tom Vickery and see when that happened. I'm just thinking, I mean, Barry overpaid, but Barry didn't appeal. The owner of the property appealed. Barry had to pay the state. And so the state paid Barry back, but the town didn't appeal, because if they did and they lost the appeal, then the town had to, there's some inequity here that we need to look at. Senator Hardy.
Two things. On that one point, my only concern about going backwards to try to help one town is then there might be another town that's like 6 weeks before that, and then there's another
Yeah.
town. And so I would be a little nervous about going back. And usually we just make laws that are moving forward. So I guess I'm a little nervous about
Well,
that.
it may be the reporting too. You said it was 2023. We'll just take a look at it.
Yeah. And then can I work with Abby and Jill on the other issue and come back with a draft is on the broader assistance thing? Or,
Assistance,
yeah.
yeah, that's okay with Abby and Jill. That
Yes,
would,
absolutely.
okay, so
Okay.
we can get that drafted, and maybe if we can get those two things out. And we haven't heard from, and if we heard from Tom Vickery, who I guess is the Cambridge lister, but we could just ask him for a timeline for that town, just to see what, so we know what that situation is. Senator Brock.
Depending on timing, as we are fast approaching crossover, I would feel much more comfortable if we included what Abby has written in this particular bill, in this bill going forward, and then for the Cadillac version, blue plate special, whatever we want to call it, of the other things, to add them if we have time, but if we don't have time, then to add them to some other vehicle, but not run the risk of losing what we have right now, the ability to put in this bill that is simple and straightforward. I would suggest that we do that.
Okay, and maybe we could, to keep it in tune with the title, we could ask for a report from PVR on how, if they would suggest any changes or have any suggestions on how listers should value timeshares. Just so they could report it back to us next year, if any, but just a general report back to us and housing, yeah, whoever's in charge. I think it's Commerce, maybe Ways and Means in the House. But on any recommendations they might have to help in the thing, and then we'll see if we can get some wording and maybe we'll have to get down to the daily special to get it through, but some wording for the state's assistance. And if it's already there, then we need to make, when did Pearson go away? He's coming back in. And Mark, I didn't try and shut you out the other day. I just didn't get your note saying, please ask Faith to let me back in until that night. So anyway, is that a road forward at this point? Abby, can you deal with that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate the direction.
Okay, we have, for those of us that have 5 o'clock meetings, we have a whole 2-minute break. Thank you. I think maybe